So we're opening with this video from 2 weekends ago of people protesting and speaking out against Line 3 here in Madison. Oh, hold on. Forgot to click all the right options and sharing. 1 second. Okay.
This week, all over America, people are writing postcards to President Biden, urging him to stop Line 3, the way he stopped the KXL pipeline. We have people around this corner with clipboards where you can take a few minutes to write a postcard to the that a leaky pipeline carrying a toxic fuel could ruin life, Lake Superior, wild rice beds, and the climate we need for a livable planet. And you can also sign one of our lovely postcards that say, "Hey, Big Bang, stop funding toxic Line 3. Sooner or later, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, and all the rest will pull out of fossil fuel. Help us get them to do it next week."
We're so pleased with that video and welcome today to our monthly meeting for the month of August. My name is Marian Friedel. I'm on the monthly meeting team along with Kelly Kearns and Christina Koch. And Julia Isaacs, who's just returning from Line 3 and will maybe joining us later. But we would just want to take a minute now to do our land acknowledgement. And again, welcome. We have a tradition of taking a few deep breaths together and reflecting on our ties to the land, and also acknowledging that this land has been lived on and treasured and belongs actually first to the Ho-Chunk people and other Native peoples. And we would like to just remember that our neighbors, the Ho-Chunk people, are not just from the past, but are very much alive in the present and have much to offer our city and our state in bringing what is sacred to them and their people and the land to us and reminding us of that. So we want to acknowledge and thank them for their time and their work with us in these endeavors. So I'm going to put it over to Kelly, who is going to moderate the meeting today and introduce our speaker.
So thank you, Marion. So tonight I'd like to introduce our speaker, Katie Cantrell. She is the Director of Corporate Outreach for the Better Food Foundation and also the founder of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. For more than a decade, Katie has led workshops on the social and ecological hazards of industrial agriculture and animal agriculture, and consulted on food policies at universities, government agencies, and Fortune 500 corporations. Her materials have been used as a resource by food justice advocates around the world. One of our members, Marilee Shushariba, heard her speak at the Global Just Recovery gathering in April and thought she would be a great speaker for this group. So we'll have time for questions for Katie at the end of her presentation. So feel free to put those questions into the chat or wait until the end and you could ask them then. So Katie, go ahead and take it away.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Let me just start sharing my screen here. All right, are you all able to see that? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you. Excellent. Great. So thank you so much for having me tonight. Again, my name is Katie Cantrell. I'm the Director of Corporate Outreach for the Better Food Foundation. And tonight I'll be talking about how we can foster sustainability by default. As Dr. Jonathan Foley said, when we think about threats to the environment, we tend to picture cars and smokestacks, not dinner. But the truth is, our need for food poses one of the biggest dangers to the planet. And within the food system, there is one sector in particular that has an outsized impact, and that is animal agriculture. Together, the world's top 5 meat and dairy companies now emit more greenhouse gases than ExxonMobil, Shell, or BP. And unfortunately, they are also funding climate denialism and blocking climate legislation. So there was some great investigative reporting earlier this year that found that big meat actually spends a larger percentage of their revenues on blocking climate policy than big oil does. And the reason for that is they don't want people to make this connection. Right now, most Americans don't realize that the food that we're eating is a major driver of climate change. Part of the reason for that is that most of us just see what's above the waterline here in this iceberg analogy. So when it comes to the food system, we think about our individual food and water consumption and our individual food waste. Because, for those of us who live in cities, we don't ever see where this food is actually coming from or how it's produced. And so all of this remains hidden to us. All of the 10 billion animals that are bred for food every year in the US, all of the manure produced, all of the corn and soy, GMO corn and soy, and the pesticides sprayed onto them that are grown to feed to those animals, all the deforestation to grow that feed, all of the transport involved, it goes on and on. I could easily spend more than an hour just talking about these impacts. But I'd want to mention them just briefly because this is the side that, big meat is paying good money to keep people from looking at and just portray this idea that our food is still coming from old McDonald's farm. But the reality is that animal agriculture is one of the leading drivers of climate change and also deforestation. So meat production is the leading cause of the Amazon rainforest being cut down. It's being cut down to make grazing land for beef cattle and land to grow soy and corn, which are fed to animals on factory farms. Another impact that's below the waterline that most of us don't see or aren't aware of is water use. And not just water use, but also land use and carbon emissions. So just about every metric, animal products are much more environmentally intensive and impactful than plant-based products. So this is an infographic from the New York Times, and you can see that, and again, on every metric, cow milk has a much larger footprint than plant-based milks. Even on water, where almond milk gets a bad rap for being water intensive, it still uses much less water than cow milk does. So if you really want to go for the best, oat milk is probably the lowest footprint overall. And then the final issue that I'll talk about that is hidden for most of us is manure runoff. So again, there are 10 billion animals bred and killed for food every year in the US, and all of those animals are producing copious amounts of waste. So their manure runoff is a leading cause of water pollution in the United States, and this is also a leading driver of environmental racism, because it's low income, often communities of color, that are the ones who live near factory farms, who have their property values decimated, who have their water and air polluted. And factory farms are actually exempt from the Clean Air Act. And so they're allowed to produce levels of air pollutants like ammonia and nitrous oxide up to 30 times higher than would be legal for even an oil and gas refinery. So this industry is operating in the shadows, and unfortunately, most people don't realize the devastating impacts that it's having on the environment. But more and more scientists are starting to focus on this, and more international organizations are starting to focus on the fact that we truly cannot keep climate change within survivable levels if we keep eating the way that we are today. So the Eat Lancet report, and actually 4 other studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, found the same thing, which is that if we cut emissions from every other industry down to 0, so energy, transportation, buildings, completely carbon neutral by 2050, but we allow the food system to continue on its current trajectory, the food system alone will take us past 1.5 degrees of warming by 2050. So we truly cannot keep climate change within survivable levels unless we radically change the way that we're eating. So what the meat industry is trying to keep people from realizing is that the greenhouse gas emissions of plant-based meals are on average 63% lower than the emissions of animal-based meals. So if we're looking at different interventions that are effective, this study was done looking at different events, and they looked at the carbon footprints of different sustainability interventions. So they found by far the most impactful one is switching the menu from beef to veggie burgers. Second to that is reducing the portion size of beef by 25%. These other sustainability measures that we tend to think of, like using recycled plastic or eliminating single-use plastic altogether, granted, they're very important to do for other reasons, but in terms of climate impact, they're basically nil. Using recycled plastic doesn't reduce carbon footprint whatsoever. Changing our food is one of the best actions that we can take. Luckily, we're headed in the right direction. So plant-based food has skyrocketed over the last few years. It's been a top trend year after year. The CEO of Starbucks said it's the most dominant shift in consumer behavior that he's seen. Over the last 4 years, plant-based menu items have increased 800%. In 2020, 57% of households bought plant-based foods, and 1/4 of Americans have recently reduced their meat consumption. So the good news is that we're already heading in the right direction in terms of consumer trends. So who's driving this? It is young people and omnivores. So the vast majority of millennials and Gen Zers are already eating plant-based foods at least 1 to 2 times a week, and also want to be eating plant-based foods even more often than that. And also, the people buying plant-based products are by and large not vegan. So 40% of households consume both plant-based and cow milk, and 98% of consumers who buy plant-based meats are also buying animal-based meats. So this is actually really great news. You know, we don't have to convince everyone to go vegan. We just have to get people to be more and more flexitarian, as it's often called. So getting omnivores to realize that we don't need to eat huge portions of meat with every meal. Eating plant-based proteins, eating meat as a garnish, you know, eating a more sustainable, more plant-forward diet is a trend that's already started. And so our goal is to help it continue to accelerate. So how do we do this? Our work is inspired by the book Nudge, which was written by Nobel laureate Richard Thaler and Harvard professor Cass Sunstein. And they look at the profound impacts of defaults and nudges on human behavior. So defaults are the option that people end up with if they don't make an active choice. And in Nudge, they explore how people have a very strong tendency to go along with the status quo or the default option. Now, partly that's because it's one less decision to make. It's just easier to stick with the default. It's one less thing to worry about. But also partly because it's assumed that defaults or the status quo are more socially acceptable. If you're opting out of them for a different choice, you're going against the grain. And for a social species like humans are, that's often challenging to do. So one of the most common examples of the power of defaults is organ donations. In Germany, people by default are not organ donors and they have to opt into it. Their participation rate there is just 12%. In Austria, which is culturally pretty similar to Germany, people by default are organ donors and they have to actively opt out of it. And their participation rate is 99%. This significant difference saves people's lives. Organ donations, it's literally a life or death matter. And the difference of whether a box is checked or not, the defaults of whether a box comes checked or comes unchecked actually saves lives. So looking at this impact in sustainability, here's a study that's directly relevant. So this study looked at energy defaults. So in the year one, which is the control, businesses were by default opted into conventional energy, and they had a choice to opt out of that into renewable energy. You can see that in year one, 100% of businesses stayed with the conventional energy, none of them opted into renewable. So for the study, they flipped the defaults. They made renewable the default and gave businesses a choice to opt out back into conventional energy. And you can see it had a huge impact. So about 70% of businesses stuck with that renewable default, and that was consistent over time. So when you combine these ideas of plant-forward diets and defaults, you get greener by default. So the basic concept is very simple. We want to do for food what that last study did for energy. So we're looking to flip the default to make sustainable plant-based meals the default and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. This is a flexible approach. It can be implemented in any environment where food is served, and it's cost effective. So at worst, it's cost neutral, and at best, it can save money on food. It's also a more inclusive strategy. So serving plant-based foods meets the needs of those with more specific diets by default. So a lot of us might not realize that it can be a really alienating experience to not be able to just sit down with coworkers and enjoy a meal, but instead to have to request a special option. So if the default is plant-based and people have the choice to add on meat and dairy, that includes everyone, including the 30 to 50 million Americans who are lactose intolerant, the majority of whom are people of color. That includes Buddhists and Jains and Hindus and Sikhs and Rastafarians and Seventh-day Adventists who are often vegetarian. It includes Jews and Muslims who are avoiding certain animal products. It includes millennials and Gen Z, who, as we've already talked about, are interested in eating more plant-based foods, and it includes communities of color. Black Americans are actually twice as likely to be vegan as white Americans, and a third of Americans of color reduced their meat consumption in the past year, compared to a quarter of Americans overall. So this is a really easy way to implement a more inclusive food environment. It's also very effective in changing people's behavior. So this study was conducted at Harvard Kennedy School's Center for Public Leadership at a conference. So in the control, like it usually is, meat was the default and people could check a box requesting a vegetarian option. So with the meat default, 3/4 of people stuck with the meat default. This is actually a much higher percentage of people requesting vegetarian than normal, so it wasn't really a representative sample. And actually, the effect probably would have been even greater if about 10% of Americans are vegetarian. So they have more vegetarians than usual at Harvard. But then we see in the vegetarian default, when they flip it to make veg the default and give people the choice to opt into meat, 2/3 of people stuck with that veg option and a third opted into meat. So this is a 43% increase in the amount of vegetarian meals served. A study done in Denmark at a conference, or at several conferences, found even greater results. So in the control here, you can see that 98% of people stuck with the meat default, 2% requested vegetarian options. And then when it was flipped, 87% of people stuck with the vegetarian default, 13% opted back into meat. This is an 80% increase in the amount of vegetarian meals served. So this has really impressive impacts in terms of the carbon and water saved when you calculate the impacts of the increase in vegetarian meals. So if there were a company with 1,000 employees that served lunch every day that implemented plant-based defaults, and they saw similar participation rates to the studies that have been done, over the course of a year, they would save 9 million gallons of water, again, cost neutral or cost savings. Comparatively, if they installed low flow toilets for their 1,000 employees, they'd only save about 600,000 gallons of water over the course of a year, and the upfront cost is $15,000. In terms of carbon savings, plant-based defaults would save 350,000 kilograms of carbon equivalents over the course of a year, cost neutral or cost savings. A 240 kilowatt solar array would only save 275,000 kilograms of carbon equivalents and would have an upfront cost of about $360,000. All right, so I encourage you to put questions in the chat if you have them. I know I'm going a little bit fast. I just want to make sure I get through everything. All right, so now I'm going to talk about how this actually works. What does this look like if we implement plant-based defaults in different scenarios? So the main strategy and the most straightforward one is to make the base plant-based, make it the default, and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. So again, nothing is being taken off the menu. People still have freedom of choice. It's just normalizing the more sustainable option. So for buffets and family style, again, make the base, the bulk of the meal plant-based, and have meat and dairy at the end of the line for people to add on. So then it becomes more of a garnish rather than making up the bulk of the meal. If there's an RSVP, that's the cleanest way to implement it. Just state that the food will be plant-based by default. Give people a box to check if they'd like to opt into meat. And then for restaurants, it can offer meat and dairy as add-ons. So we're already used to this, like for bowls or for salads. Often the base is vegetarian, you pay $3 extra to add chicken, that sort of scenario. If it's not plausible to make the base entirely plant-based, you can still create a perception that plant-based is the norm by offering a minimum 2-to-1 ratio of plant-based to animal-based options. If there's just one vegetarian option, often that's perceived by omnivores as like, oh, that's the one for the vegetarians. So if I'm not vegetarian, I think, oh, that's not for me. But our goal is to make plant-based food accessible and appealing to as many people as possible to entice omnivores to want to eat more plant-based options. A study at the University of Cambridge found that by increasing the ratio of veg to meat options from 1 to 3 to 2 to 2, they increased the take rate of veg options by 60%. Again, by shifting this perception that like, oh, that's the one just for vegetarians to, oh, these are all food options that sound delicious. Another great strategy is subtle substitutions. So serving plant-based condiments, milks, desserts, and breads by default. Again, this is more inclusive because it meets the needs of people with allergies and dietary restrictions by default. And nowadays products are so good that diners won't even notice the difference. So at Yale, their most popular cupcake is actually vegan, and they don't advertise it. They just want to be more inclusive. It's easier for them not to have to, make several different versions of things for people with different allergies and food restrictions. So they make it vegan. It's just a very decadent chocolate cupcake, and that's their best-selling dessert. If there are printed menus, it's important to incorporate plant-based options into the main menu and also ensure that the first option in each section is plant-based. So again, if the vegetarian options are segregated into their own section, it's seen as, oh, that's just for vegetarians. So I'm not even going to look at that section if I'm not vegetarian. Whereas if it's incorporated into the main menu, I just notice, ooh, risotto primavera, that sounds delicious. I'm going to have that for dinner. World Resources Institute's Better Buying Lab found this strategy increased the selection of plant-based items by 56%. Also using mouthwatering labels that focus on taste, texture, and provenance, rather than prominently advertising a food as vegetarian, vegan, meatless, or as healthy, low-fat. Because again, it's perceived either as, oh, that's just for vegans, or as, oh, that's restrictive, it's not going to taste good. So, this picture on the right, that's a beautiful cake. Imagine how many more people would be likely to order it if it were just called a decadent chocolate cake. Again, the World Resource Institute's Better Buying Lab did a study in the UK, and they found that renaming meat-free sausages and mash to Cumberland spiced veggie sausages and mash increased sales by 76%. All right, so how does this work? How can we work with you to help bring greener by default to your institution? So this works in any food setting. In businesses, we can work with catered meetings, micro kitchens, cafeterias. universities, faculty meetings, conferences, dining facilities, for organizations, nonprofits, meetings and events, or potlucks. And actually, we have a whole initiative to environmental NGOs encouraging the adoption of food policies that help promote the world that you want to see. So, we can lead by example and walk the walk. And I know that 350 is really focused on fossil fuels by and large. And it's nice because, internal policies, they don't take away from the work that you're doing. It's not any extra effort. It's just saying, we're already serving food. Let's be more conscious of the food that we're serving and ensure that we're helping to normalize the more sustainable options. And we do also work with conferences and restaurants and cafes. And our whole approach is to make this as easy as possible to implement. So we provide one-on-one consultation, implementation guides, menus and recipes, sourcing assistance, marketing and education materials, impact calculations, and it's all completely free of charge. And I did just briefly want to say, I know there's been a lot of attention lately around individual versus systemic change, and that there's been some negative attention around plant-based diets as kind of an ineffective individual solution. And that's where it defaults, and this institutional work, I think it really hits the sweet spot between individual and systemic change, because there's a lot of research showing that showing that people's behavior drives their attitudes, rather than their attitudes driving behavior. So if we're eating meat with every single meal, we're less likely to be open to learning about the environmental impacts of the food system. Whereas if we're already eating plant-based food at work and we know that it's delicious, then we'll be more open to changing our attitudes. And so here we work on systemic change. We work with institutions. We're working to shift large-scale food purchasing. But in doing so, we're also helping individuals identify with sustainable food and shift their mindsets, which then creates this positive feedback loop where then they're more likely to support initiatives to increase regulations or decrease subsidies, those sorts of large-scale systemic changes that require a lot of public support. So it's all tied together, and this is one of the ways that individuals can actually shift institutional food purchasing through creating these initiatives at work. We actually have a lot of power in the institutions that we're part of to help introduce these initiatives, and then it can have all of these powerful downstream effects. So you can help create a more resilient world by default. And I will stop there. This is our website and my email address, and I will see if I have any time for questions now. If not, I'd love to talk with you in the breakout group. All right, let me stop sharing so I can see all of you.
Katie, that was really helpful. And if at some point we could get that website, your website and your email into the chat, that would be great. Yes. First, just a definition question. Early on, you had mentioned that 57% of households bought plant-based foods. Can you just define a little bit more what you mean by that? Because I would assume that 100% of plant households would buy produce and grains and other things that are plant-based. So could you do a little bit better definition of that?
Yes, good question. So it's a grocery category. There's trade groups that track these things. And what they mean by plant-based foods in that context is plant-based alternatives to animal food. So that's plant-based milks and mayonnaise and eggs and cheeses and meats. It's people buying plant-based versions of animal-based foods. Yeah, not fruits and vegetables.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the questions that came in says that in many restaurants, when one orders a vegetarian meal, then many waiters would ask, would you like to add some protein, implying that there's no protein in the vegetarian meal. Is there a good response to this question?
Yeah, I mean, so we do work with restaurants, and we really encourage them to make sure that the plant-based option has protein in it and is really satisfying and hearty, because, if it's just grains and vegetables, it's healthy in one sense, but it's not going to be filling enough. And you do need protein. So we encourage them to add, tofu or tempeh or lentils or beans or, plant-based meats. So, I mean, maybe asking, yeah, I would love that. What plant-based proteins do you offer? Kind of encouraging the restaurants to think about diversifying their plant-based protein sources, to realize that it's not just animal-based foods that have protein.
Yeah, that's great. So another question there can be problems with where the vegetarian or vegan items are significantly less palatable than the meat-based items, at least in the experience of Mike, who provided this question. So do you have a response for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that thankfully has changed quite a bit over the last couple of years and continues to just get better and better. So, Mike, if it's been a little while, I'd encourage you to try the options now. It's a world of difference than it was even 5 years ago. I mean, also just, keeping in mind that a lot of what makes food delicious is the sauces and the spices. So if you have a grain and veggies and a protein and a really delicious sauce, then that's often all it takes to be satisfying and delicious. Yeah, and it depends, if you're going to restaurants or if you're cooking at home, I'm happy to offer more resources for that.
Great. And we also had a comment that it seems like vegan is often seemed to be like a dirty word, which unfortunately. So another question from Eve, or comment from Eve. I gradually learned that checking the box for vegetarian sometimes leads to a tastier meal instead of dry, tasteless chicken dish. And I totally agree with that.
Yes, yeah, it's funny, I was talking to an old family friend about this initiative, and she was saying she's not vegetarian, but she said so many times I've been at conferences and I've been jealous of the vegetarian option, and I've never thought to request it, but looking at what they're eating, I was jealous. And I've talked to so many vegetarians and vegans who say at work they always have to fend off coworkers who are trying to take their meal because if they let other people take it, they won't have anything to eat. But of course, ideally, we want to encourage people to try these options, and we want to make it available to as many people as possible. So that's, yeah, I hear that story over and over again. And again, this is a strategy to make it more accessible for everyone.
Right. So making that by default, everyone would just pick that unless they really wanted the meat.
Exactly.
Yes. So Emily's comment or question here is government subsidies to the corn, soy, and livestock industries make meat meals less expensive than produce intensive meals. Assuming that the government starts subsidizing fruit and vegetable production and reduces meat subsidies, are we concerned that meat will become something associated with the elite and therefore even more glamorous? I know that currently the cost associated with veganism, particularly if you're conscious about whether your food is local, organic, sustainably produced, is a major barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's interesting because the United States is really a huge anomaly here. Historically, throughout time and in every other country, meat has been very expensive. It has been a luxury item. It's been the food of the elite. And so-called peasant foods are potatoes and rice and beans and lentils and bread. So because of the system of factory farming and because of the industrialized agriculture and the government subsidies, and also the externalized costs, taxpayers are paying the environmental price and the health price of the factory farm system. We've really turned everything on its head. So now meat is cheap and fruits and vegetables are a luxury. So, I think that people still hold on to this idea that meat is a luxury. I talk to many people in particular who are first or second generation Americans, and the people who have come to the US have this idea that we're living well if we're eating meat every day. So I'm not concerned that meat will be seen as a luxury item if it becomes more expensive, because I think it's already seen that way. It's just unfortunately unaccessible. Plant-based foods are inaccessible and unaffordable for too many people. I mean, it's the most affordable to eat McDonald's every day, but that takes decades off of people's lives. I mean, it has such severe consequences for individual and community health. That I think the benefits of making fruits and vegetables more affordable and factory farm meat less affordable would greatly outweigh any downside.
Yes, and that plays into Mike's other comment that shopping at Willie Co-op is significantly more expensive than at Woodman's, in part because of some of those subsidies probably. So Mary Lee had a comment that vegetables do have proteins in them and Americans tend to over proteinize.
Yes.
And Marion has asked, could you talk a little bit more about the work that you do and how you find your clients or your organization does?
Yes, so I work primarily with corporations, but I've also been working with a lot of environmental NGOs. I actually, prior to doing this work, I founded a nonprofit that was focused on educating people about factory farming. So we would speak to universities, Fortune 500 corporations, other nonprofits. And through doing that work, I just got connected to a network of like sustainability directors and people who are passionate about food sustainability. And so I've mostly found my current clients through those networks that I was already tapped into, just wonderful people all around the country who really care about sustainable food policy. And so they help to introduce this idea at their companies or at their nonprofits or their universities.
Good. If others have more questions specifically about kind of what she does and what her organization does, we will be having a breakout session after the main part of the meeting that Katie will be sticking around for any kind of comments or questions that you have there. Just a couple more comments that came in if you're concerned. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Kelly. Yeah.
Sorry, I saw a question here that I would like to address really quickly if there's still time. So there's a question from Kathleen. Do you work to switch people from beef to chicken or turkey as less carbon intensive to eat? So no, we do not. Right now, as I mentioned, there's 10 billion animals farmed every year, 99% of them on factory farms, and over 9 billion of those are chickens. So if you think about it, I mean, yes, chicken has a much lower carbon footprint than beef does, but one cow can feed a family of 4 for a year. One chicken feeds a family of 4 for a night. And so if the average American eats 3 burgers per week. So if we were to switch all of that beef consumption over to chicken, we would need thousands of more factory farms. And so that's, thousands of more miles of river pollution and air pollution and severe health consequences for low-income communities of color who are forced to live near these factory farms. So, while it does have a lower carbon footprint, chicken factory farms have a huge environmental footprint. And chicken still it's many times more impactful than lentils or beans because, eating lower on the food chain is always more sustainable. Chickens, you have to feed them. And so you're growing soy to feed to chickens and then eating those chickens. It'd be much more effective if you were just growing that soy to eat directly or growing the lentils or beans. And so we really focused on plant-based as the most sustainable, but also the most just option when you consider the whole picture and not just the carbon footprint.
Okay, thank you so much, Katie. This has been really elucidating, I think, for all of us. So I know there's still more questions in the chat, and if you want to look through those while we're doing the rest of our meeting, then you can maybe discuss some of those at the breakout session. So thank you very much. So now we're going to move into hearing some updates from our other campaigns, and we're going to start with a video from our climate justice team. And I believe that Tanis Mathiasen is the co-lead of the climate justice team, is going to introduce that. Tanis?
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, so this is another sort of non-traditional climate change related topic that we're going to be talking about next, which is critical race theory. And so you may not think of this as being related to the climate crisis that we're facing, but 350 Madison believes that we cannot successfully fight climate change unless we also fight racism and other social justice issues. Racism, climate chaos, and other problems affecting all of us have their roots in the same systems of oppression and exploitation. And to be successful, we need to get at the roots of these systems. So this is the essence of the climate justice work that we do here at 350 Madison. And since critical race theory has been in the news a lot lately, and a lot of it has been false and misleading, we thought we would just spend a few minutes tonight talking about it. And the first thing we're going to do is just show you this 3-minute video. So I think Christina.
Right now to bring more context into the conversation by taking a closer look at what exactly critical race theory is and what it is not. Anthony Hill continues our team coverage.
Critical race theory has become a hot and divisive topic. And with all the misinformation, it's made it more difficult to engage in dialogue and healthy debate on how we educate students from our nation's history to current social disparities. I spoke with several education experts to explain what it is and how it would theoretically look in the classroom.
I think there's a good deal of misunderstandings of critical race theory and how it's applied.
So what is critical race theory? Many scholars define it as a framework to help explain how and why racial inequities still exist in our society.
Often people think about racism as individual acts of bias or bigotry, but really CRT helps us understand the ways that racism is a system.
Proponents of critical race theory argue that that system has lasting effects and impacts the lives of people of color today.
We don't want to just tell certain aspects of history. We want to be able to tell all aspects of history so that our children are coming out of the school systems K through 12 with a deeper understanding of what society is, what it was, and how to move forward, how we can make it even better.
Critical race theory was started back in the 1970s by legal scholars and activists as a way of examining laws and power structures through the lens of race.
And acknowledge that there are different outcomes for different people and that perhaps justice is not blind.
Since then, it's made its way into different academic disciplines as one of the many lenses used to critically analyze society. Critical race theory is not taught as an actual subject in K through 12 classrooms. However, proponents would like to see it used as one of the ways to teach history and civics.
We want our teachers, we want our school leaders to be able to look at phenomena through different lenses.
One of the concerns is that looking at history through the lens of critical race theory would have a detrimental effect on white children and portrays white people as inherently racist.
Teaching kids to hate their country and to hate each other is not worth one red cent.
That's not the purpose of critical race theory. It's really the opposite, to help us to be more inclusive, to help us to be more empathic, to help us to analyze, to be able to look at phenomena with a critical eye.
Another concern is that it will divide students based on race.
If anything, it actually brings them closer together.
And that was Anthony Hill reporting. Proponents of critical race theory argue that how we currently teach American history in schools lacks depth and doesn't exactly teach all of our history. Opponents argue that it could further the racial divide between students in classrooms. And our coverage of this important.
Thank you. I don't know who's in charge of the slides tonight. Is that Christina? Yeah, thank you. If you want to show the first slide. So while she's doing that, I'll keep talking. And the first slide that Christina is going to show explains what critical race theory is, a short, quick, succinctly. And I don't think we need to repeat that. I think the video did that. But what's also important is not just what it is, but what the opponents of it are saying, as was mentioned in the video. And the opponents of critical race theory are falsely saying these things, that it teaches that all white people are racist. You can see the other ones here. Critical race theory, as we just heard, teaches none of those things. Next slide, please. So, but based on this misinterpretation and misinformation about what critical race theory is, there are 26 states, including Wisconsin, which I'll talk about in a minute, that have introduced bills or done other things that restrict teaching critical race theory. But what they're really doing is restricting how we talk about racism and sexism. They're including in some of those as well. 11 states out of those 26 have already enacted bans in one shape or another. If you're interested, there is this very good article in Education Week that has a map of the states that have enacted those prohibitions, and a lot of good information in that article. When I'm done, I'll put that link in the chat, I think. Next slide, please. So in Wisconsin, I was surprised to learn there are a number of proposals that would ban public schools, universities, and technical colleges from teaching students or from training employees about concepts such as systemic racism and implicit bias. And so these are the items that are specifically called out in some of these proposals about what cannot be taught. And the other part of the proposals is that the school systems, if they do talk about any of these issues, they would lose 10% of their state funding. Next slide, please. So if you think, as we do, that we need more discussion of race and systemic racism, not less, because these proposals, if enacted, would make teachers afraid to bring up racism, most likely, or discuss it in any way in their schools, which is not going in the right direction. We would encourage you to call either of the two leads, the Senate lead or the Assembly lead, main sponsors of these bills, or send them an email and say that you oppose SB 411 and AB 411, which prohibit discussion of racism and systemic racism in classrooms. And that's it for me. So I will turn it back to the main meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanis. Now we're going to hear from Phyllis Hasbrook, the leader of our tar sands team, and she's going to give us updates on both line 3 and line 5.
Okay, took me a second to find that unmute. Okay, so line 3, as you all know, Enbridge line 3 goes through northern Minnesota and into Wisconsin. It's at a crucial stage. They're almost done drilling under all the lakes and rivers that they mean to. And so how can we best help? So I sent out an e-blast last week, and with the great news that we got a grant from the Sierra Club nationally to hire a bus or vans to take people up there, just to make it easier for people to go up and stand with the Indigenous people on the front lines. The good news is we have 29 people responded to that already. The bad news is what you've been hearing on the radio and so on about the can't say it, the Delta variant. And so we are debating whether we're going to do this or not, because we don't want to be bringing death on a bus to the people up there. And there's a lot more research we have to do to find out what people up there think and what the CDC thinks. But you know, just the knowledge that people that are fully vaccinated can get the Delta variant and have as much viral load as someone who wasn't vaccinated and can therefore spread it is sobering to anybody thinking about getting people in vehicles together and taking them up there. So it's not for sure what we're going to do. And we'll weigh all these things. And if you want to weigh in, you can email me with your ideas. But moving on, there's also another thing that we can do to help stop line 3. And that is prepare for a National Day of Action, August 25th. And this is many groups nationally are calling for this, targeting the Army Corps of Engineers, because they could call for an environmental impact statement. They could suspend water permits for line 3. And that's what was done with KXL, and they could do it too. And so it's pressuring them and of course Biden. And so we just had our tar sands team meeting a little while ago, and we started brainstorming for that day of action. And we're going to have a meeting to plan more on the 12th at 7 p.m. a Zoom meeting. And contact me if you would like to be invited to that. Okay, first I'll read this and then we'll go to the next slide. The other thing we're doing is getting ready for the big line 5 battle. So as you know, that's an expansion of the existing line 5. and it would endanger Copper Falls State Park, the Kakagan Sloughs with their wild rice beds, and Lake Superior itself and the Apostle Islands. So we're doing some local organizing in the Ashland area, and I'll show you some pictures of that. And we're preparing for a response to the draft EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, when the DNR drops it. And we want to do an artistic response, phone banking, letters to the editor, and a whole lot of testimony and public comments. So can I have the next slide? This is just half of the buttons that we made and sent up to our allies in Ashland, and they had a table at the Big Top Chautauqua this past weekend, when it was a wonderful presentation. I watched it online of the Anishinaabe story. It was like a musical about the Anishinaabe origin stories. And these were sold for donation. You can see some of them have sturgeon on them. Next one, please. These are the other half of them. And these were designed by Rebecca Finster from our art collective. And we had a little mini art build and cranked them out on a machine, turned them into buttons. And next, please. Another thing we're doing is lawn signs. And this is happening both in the Ashland area, and it will be happening here. And you see this organization, the Property Rights and Pipeline Center, gave us 100 signs, coroplast and the wires, and they have their info on them, and then they leave space in the middle for your info, and they're free. And unfortunately, what they gave us, the sticker with the words you see here, protect our waters, reject line 5, was just a bumper sticker. So it was a nice bumper sticker, very good for if it's on a bumper, but not very good on a lawn sign. So instead, Richard Jones, our wonderful member of the art collective and the Tar Sands team, he has a printing press and he designed this. And Paul Fieber, our kite maker, had some Tyvek he donated, and we made these and glued them on. So those were also given out at the Big Top Chautauqua this past weekend. And we'll be doing, placing some of these in strategic places later on. Next, please. And then we're doing infographics also. And I don't have them all. Person in charge of them got sick, but here's one that I think is lovely. And this is a photograph from the air of the Kakagan Sloughs, where the largest natural wild rice beds on the Great Lakes exist. And it's directly downstream from where the Line 5 expansion would cross the Bad River, and it would definitely be devastated, destroyed. They call it Copper Falls for a reason. There's waterfalls. It's very wild country. There's no way any first responders could get in there and stop the oil if it started flowing down there, and it would come directly into here. Next, please. And here's another one of the infographics. Warning, would you put an oil pipeline here? This scene of devastation happened in Ashland County in July 2016. They have a problem there with the water runs off very quickly because they only have a little topsoil on top of volcanic rock, which is so hard it can't absorb any water. So that's why they get the flash floods. And just imagine if there had been a pipeline there. So we are going to be pushing these out on social media to educate people more about what's going on. Next, please. This is an ad we put in the Ashland Daily Press. It was a half-page ad. This is only the top of it because it's a long, skinny thing. If I gave you the whole thing, you couldn't really read it. But this is true. Enbridge has spent millions on propaganda, and we can't do as much, but we do something. Next, please. And then here's how you can help the Tar Sands team. So here's what we need: more graphic designers. Rebecca is wonderful, but there might be some other of you out there who could help spell her. We need phone bankers so that we can make Line 5 a statewide controversy. That's what Governor Evers needs, is it for it to be very controversial, because he doesn't want to be controversial. We need people to write letters to him, to Secretary Cole, and letters to the editor. We have some, but we want more bold, artistic people to get the media's attention with creative events, like the flash mob dance that you saw the video of. People who can paint, press buttons on a simple machine, and all kinds of other small, easy to do tasks, and planners, doers, photographers, videographers, and video editors, etc. So hope you'll join us, and you can contact me. There's my email there, and get involved. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. And so now we're going to turn to the fundraising team. And Emily Park and Gail Nordheim are Gail is the team lead for the fundraising team. They are going to discuss an upcoming fundraiser and then run a poll.
Okay, Gail, I can share my screen. I managed to get my stuff working here. Can you guys see my screen at all? Yes.
Yes. It's on its way. Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So if you go to mallardstickets.com, it will redirect you to this website here. So it's mallardstickets.com. You can also get there via the Madison Mallards main website. And you'll see this box here that says promotions. So if you type in 350 there and click find tickets, it'll take you to this website. And then 350 Madison is going to get $10 from every ticket purchased through this way, regardless of which level of ticket you buy. So when you get to this page, it'll be zoomed in on the section 203. And section 203 is where our reserved seats are. So all of the white dots here, those are the ones that are reserved that count towards our fundraiser. So if they're white, that means that they're available. As you can see, like if they're grayed out, like these 4 right here, they're not available because I bought those. So that's going to be available for this coming Saturday, August 7th, or next Friday, so a little less than 2 weeks from now, on August 13th. Both games are at 6:35 in the evening. So what you would do is you would just pick your seats. Let's say you wanted, these two, and then you'll get an option. They're all terrace seats, so the main part of the stadium here. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see where section 203 is. So here's section 203. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, but it's sort of bottom right, upper parts of the bleachers along the first baseline. Pretty good seats. And there's the drop down menu here. If you select the beer or soda option, that means that you are going to be also getting access to a pre-game food and beverage buffet, which I believe is in a tent on the grounds somewhere, so outdoors. And then you can select either if you want a beer or a soda, or if you want to skip the pre-game buffet, you can just select ticket only, and that'll make the ticket cheaper. So $22 for ticket only, and then $32 if you want the pre-game food plus soda, and then $37 if you want it with beer. And then you would just go ahead, add them to your cart, and then you would check out. So again, there's one this coming Saturday, and then one next Friday, both of them at 6:35. And I believe the pre-game food would start at about 5, maybe 5:30. I'm not sure which. Steve Lou says, I'm guessing the buffet is not plant-based. I don't know, but I do know from previous games that the regular concessions at the Mallards games are generally pretty vegetarian friendly. They have like, if I remember correctly, they have a black bean burger, and then of course there's always like fries, stuff like that. So not healthy, but plant-based, certainly. Definitely more options than you would expect from a very small minor league stadium. So that is something I am pleased to say. Yeah, so I guess if anybody has any questions about that, drop it in the chat and I'll try to answer them if I can.
Thanks, Emily. And we really do encourage, this is the first time we've tried a ballpark baseball fundraiser. And as Emily said, we do get $10 per ticket. So we really hope you'll come. It should be fun. And if you come early, it's a chance to see other people from 350 Madison. And I hope everyone can participate to make this a success. The other little announcement for fundraising is we are in midst of our summer fundraiser. So if you could go to our website, 350madison.org, and go to donate, we really appreciate a donation. you could spare. And then finally, we have a little poll tonight. We're really looking at various types of fundraising events, participatory fundraising events. We had thanks to Emily and others, we had a really successful garage sale this weekend. We're trying out the Mallards game, and there are some other things we're thinking about too. And we would like to get the feedback from those of you that are here about your preferences and your thoughts about fundraising events. And it looks like I can't get into the poll. So can someone start the poll?
We'll have to see. Anyone who's a co-host, Emily, Kelly,
It won't let me in.
can any of you start it?
We need someone who's logged in with 350.org, I think.
I think we have too many people who are locked in.
I see it. It popped up for me.
It's up here now.
Okay.
Should we answer?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not seeing it, unfortunately, but basically the first question asks about several different types of fundraising events, and check as many of them as you think you might be interested in participating in. And then the second question asks about your comfort level as temperatures get colder this fall, asks about your comfort level attending indoor events. We would just like that feedback to help us with planning. And perhaps someone who is seeing the results when we're done could read them off, because I'm not seeing anything.
Gail, try pushing on, clicking on the polling.
It tells me I'm logged in from another device. Your polling session is inactive.
Are you, Gail, if you're signed in with the official 350 login, that might be why you're not seeing it.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm signed in with my own. So I don't know why I'm not seeing it.
So Emily, if you're seeing it, could you read the results?
I just got the poll itself. So I filled it out, but I didn't get any results popping up.
I can see it. So we got number one, which of the following outdoor fundraising events would you be likely to participate in? Ticketed social event, 47%, sporting event, 16%, group volunteer activity, 63%, and cycle for climate, 45-day challenge, 37%. And number two, how would you feel about indoor events? Comfortable, 16%. Comfortable if attendees are masked and or vaccinated, 42%. Uncomfortable, 32%. And unsure or it depends, 11%.
Okay, thank you everyone for that input. That will be really helpful for the fundraising team.
Okay, so next, Nikki, if you could talk about the volunteer of the month.
All right. Give me 1 second here. I had a quick pop up. All right. Thank you everybody for coming, and I would like to recognize one of our fantastic volunteers because without volunteers, this organization does not exist. And this month, we really want to recognize Richard Jones. So yay! I don't think he's currently here right now, but we're going to talk a little bit about him anyway, and he'll hear about it later.
So Richard is still up at line 3.
Yep, absolutely. And that's part of the reason he's the volunteer of the month. So, he is a member of the Tar Sands team as well as the Art Collective. So he does a number of different things with 350 Madison. He got involved in early 2020 when Extinction Rebellion and 350 Madison decided to collaborate on an Earth Day celebration at the farmers market with a flash mob and a parade of different creatures. So the planning committee met at his studio, and he used to make incredible blown glass there. He then retired from doing blown glass because it burns natural gas. And he's taking responsibility and to live a low carbon lifestyle and takes it very seriously. And he also bikes almost everywhere. So anyway, in January and February of 2020, there were a few joint art builds at the studio, and he made a huge sun that he carries on a backpack. He has a huge sandhill crane head that he started. It was cut short because of the pandemic, but lots of art coming out of his studio. He got involved with the tar sands team about a year ago and joined our Get Out the Vote artist group, which after the election morphed into that art collective. And he's been a critical member of that group. He helps the tar sands team gets the public attention with his art pieces. And not only does he have an engineering mind, he also has a lot of equipment, a studio, and uses that in a way that forwards the cause. So for the January 17th event at the farmers market, he used his talents to trace all of the indigenous art banners, the Protect the Great Lakes and Mississippi banner. I think you can go to next slide. I think we have another art one, a couple more. So, he painted them. He also created that big Water is Life banner in that first page there, which contains the names of the many Wisconsin rivers, which was, in that demonstration across from Chase Bank and the flash mob. So he uses his old printing machine to create lawn signs for the Line 5 campaign and all sorts of different things. So he is just so critical to what we do. He's quiet, he has a dry sense of humor, he's a deep thinker, and he's always keeping several aspects of situations in mind, and he shares his thoughts in a helpful and collaborative way. So the Art Collective has really been this electric group since it started, just always coming up with really fantastic ideas. And Richard is a big part of why it is so energizing. So the tar sands team is really grateful. The Art Collective is really grateful. And I know he's not on the Zoom call because, like Kelly said, he's up to support the frontline fight with Line 3. So he is, on the front lines as well. He's just a fantastic activist, and we're really happy to recognize him.
Great, thank you, Nikki. Good that we have these great volunteers to work with. So,
Kelly, you got muted somehow.
sorry, I believe we have one more announcement from Kermit, but before we do that, Kermit, I'm going to tell people how to rename themselves for the breakout rooms so they can work on doing that while Kermit's doing his announcement. So if you want to stay in the main room, if you're relatively new to 350 Madison and want to learn more about 350 Madison and talk to Nikki, our volunteer coordinator, then you stay in the main room and you don't have to do anything. If you would like to talk with our speaker, Katie, then you're going to want to put a 1 in front of your name. And I'll tell you how to do that in a second. If you want to talk about line 3, you're going to put a 2 in front of your name. So the way to do this is you go to the participants list. So click on that at the bottom of your page, find your name and go to more. If you hover over your name and go to more, and it gives you the chance to rename yourself. So you put you put that number 1 for talking to Katie, or number 2 for line 3 in front of your name. And then once you've done that, then Christina can move you into the breakout room when we're ready to do those breakout rooms. So with that, we're going, I want to have Kermit give his announcement, and then we'll briefly go over all these upcoming team meetings. Kermit?
Thank you very much, Kelly. Yeah, just really quickly, Citizens Climate Lobby is another organization that we collaborate with, and which has been in the trenches on climate change front. They are currently focused on the US Senate and doing as much as we can to let them know that there is widespread public support for a carbon price. And so there is a website. I'm going to pop a brief couple of sentences along with the link into the chat. And that website, cclusa.org/Senate, gives you script options for an email message and a phone call to your senators, and allows you to register support with them for a carbon price. This is timely and strategic because they are convinced that this is a breakthrough watershed moment for federal action due to the reconciliation package that's being developed and the climate change policies that are being developed to be kind of worked into that. And so we are wanting to encourage carbon pricing, given the fact that scientists, economists across the political spectrum see that as a powerful strategy to help bring things under control. So the link is in the chat. Thank you very much for all you do and for supporting groups like 350 and our friends at CCL.
Thank you, Kermit. So real quickly, we'll run through the upcoming team meetings. So starting with the climate justice team, second Monday of each month. Tanis's contact information is there. Tar sands team, the next meeting will be Monday the 13th. Contact Phyllis for more information. The divest and defund team, fourth Monday, so August 23. And then the community climate solutions team is the third Thursdays, August 19th. And then the state policy group of that community climate solutions team meets twice a month, and you can contact Gail for that one. And then we also have the communications action team that meets on the third Monday, looking for new volunteers there. And then we do want to make an announcement about the September meeting. And Christina, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I can give a brief heads up. Our September meeting is not going to be the first Monday of the month because it's Labor Day, so we'll be a week later on September 13th. Our speaker will be Morgan Edwards. She's a professor at UW-Madison and studies climate policy, energy responses. And so I'll be meeting with her soon to nail down the exact topic, but her work covers a lot of, I think, really interesting topics of interest to this group. So really looking forward to have her as a speaker.
Thank you. And with that, it's time to move to breakout rooms. So hopefully everybody has their name renamed, and you can head off to your breakout room as soon as you get the notice for that.
And Chiamaka, you can stop recording.